Hi, my name is Zach Dennis, and this presentation is going to be on telecommunication services and privacy during a global pandemic. So, before I get into any of that information, I wanted to provide some scope on exactly what this presentation will be covering. Um, I'm going to give some background on COVID-19 and how telecommunication services are being used in response to that. What is being done specifically in the US, what contact tracing is, the privacy concerns that go along with that, and an interesting project that's happening right now. So, COVID-19 originated in Wuhan, China in December 2019, and since then it has killed hundreds of thousands of people and infected millions more. What makes it so dangerous is that symptoms appear between 2 to 14 days after initial infection, which means that a person that is asymptomatic, which means they are not showing any symptoms, can still spread the virus. Additionally, the virus can live on surfaces for up to 72 hours, furthering the possibility of being spread. And the average number of transmissions is 1.5 to 3.5. That means that for every person that gets infected, they are transmitting it to 1.5 to 3.5 other people. So this is a graph of um, cases in the United States. Um, I got this directly from the CDC. As you can see, we started getting cases around mid-March, and since then it has exploded. I got this April 22nd, I believe, and there was 650,000 cases around then, and now we're close to a million. So how does telecommunications fit into this? Telecommunication companies have access to massive amounts of data. And outside of the US, these companies are sharing data with their governments. For example, Germany, Australia, Israel, and many other countries are sharing this data, but they're anonymizing it, and that's how they're able to get by that. South Korea um, is going a little more in depth. They're actually tracking specific people known to have the virus, and then they publish the whereabouts of that person online without their name. That seems very invasive, but I'll go into how that has helped them later on. So the data that telecommunication companies are using is geolocation data. This data is good because it shows hotspots, because you know where each device is and the proximity to other devices. So if a number of devices are gathering in a certain area, you will show a hotspot, which could lead to that place getting shut down or other restrictions being imposed. Compliance with stay-at-home orders if people are out and about traveling. Um, One thing that's interesting is that you can also predict the economic impact with geolocation data, um, with the reduction in retail customers going to essential retailers, or even a reduction in miles driven in a car. So economists can take those measures and predict the impact of the quarantine. And lastly, this data can help prevent the spread of the virus and even trace the virus. And I'll explain that in greater detail on the next slide. So, what exactly is tracing and what is its impact? It's called contact tracing, and it's been used in South Korea, Singapore, and China. And as I mentioned previously, it is it can be invasive and non-invasive. It depends on um, the country using it. So you get location data from the cell phones. This helps track the spread of the virus, and it can also warn people who may have been exposed if that device got close proximity with another device. Um, in order for this to work, widespread testing is needed. Uh, you have to know who has the virus in the first place in order to trace it to new people and warn them about it. And right now, the United States is not at that level. Um, and especially since New York has gone a little bit overrun with cases. In places like New York, where it is overrun, it will also not work as well, since it'll just be widespread and spreading too quickly. So prevention, and prevention is maybe not the best word for this. Um, More of like a reduction. It tells those that are who have been affected to prevent future spreading, but by that point they might have already spread it. So it cannot prevent it, but it can help reduce the number of people that it gets transmitted to. And like I've stated previously, South Korea used very invasive measures um, to track the spread of the virus. But as you can see, they started getting cases about a month before the US did. But by about April 22nd, when I took this graph, uh, they were pretty much down to zero, very, very minimal cases. So, can the virus be stopped with data? The University of Oxford has done a lot of research on this, and they've done a lot of simulations. So, in order to stop the epidemic, you have to reduce the virus's reproductive number to under one. What this means is that the average transmissions, like previously stated at the beginning, needs to be under one. So, every one person transmits it to less than one other person. And in a model they did, they found that instantaneous contact tracing could do this. What that is that the moment that somebody tests positive for the virus, it would send out a message to anybody that came in close proximity to them, a message telling them that they could possibly be infected and that they would go into a self quarantine immediately. Um, but please note that this was only a model, and as one of my professors states, uh, all professors are. Oh. So, what about the US? Due to stricter laws, the US has not started using data from telecommunication companies. Instead, they are getting data through many projects, and one of them is called the COVID-19 Mobility Data Network. This project is mostly working with state and local governments, um, and they're pulling data from millions of cell phones, and they're hoping to get it to 500 cities in the US. Um, but they are not working with the federal government as of now. Um, and this data actually comes from the mobile advertising industry, and this is due to less privacy laws and stuff like that on that type of data. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later on. So, what are the privacy implications for the tracking and whatnot? So I'll go over the EU and the US just to kind of narrow it down. In the EU, they have an e-privacy directive, meaning that companies need individuals' permissions in order to use their data. But companies and the government say that they are actually complying with this because the data is anonymized. But weak anonymization is cause for concern. Say they use a weak encryption and somebody is able to crack it later. As long as that data is still being used and people can hack into it, it is a threat. Um, but they have set up an ethics committee to audit how the data is being used and make sure that it is they're following all the rules of using that data. In the US, they have much stricter policies than other countries. Um, and because anonymized data could still be used to identify and track individuals using other data points, um, it's a privacy violation because they could track a specific person. But they use advertising data right now because it is less restricted because most people have actually opted into that. And a lot of people don't think about opting in, but it's it's just something they do. One thing that's interesting is Verizon and AT&T have not yet been approached, but there have been discussions by the government about gathering U.S. telecom data, but the legality is unclear. Um, so following that up may or may not ever happen. So is there a workaround? Is a good question to ask. But first, you got to weigh the value of privacy versus the possibility of saving lives. There's benefits on both sides, and it's just a hard decision to make, and it's something that you have to ask yourself. So the interesting project that's happening right now is with Apple and Google, and it's actually a collaboration project, which is very rare because Apple and Google are rivals. So they are not usually working on projects together. But what the project is a software that tells people if they were recently in contact with an infected person. Sound familiar? It's exactly like contact tracing. Um, but they're building the tool into the OS of iPhones and Androids. They'll make it opt-in, and people will voluntarily report if they are infected. They believe that they kind of have an advantage because they have billions of phones worldwide. And so they believe that their reach might provide better data than other companies doing similar projects. They are hoping to have it done in the next couple of months. Um, and one thing for privacy concerns is that it doesn't track location. It instead tracks proximity to other devices. So if somebody gets into close proximity, that other person tests positive, that person will be notified without it ever tracking the exact location. Another good thing about this project is that it will save battery life since it's built directly into the OS versus third-party applications running on the devices. And Apple and Google promise to have strong controls and protections for user privacy, but even opt-in project like this still raises privacy concerns. Privacy is kind of a sticky issue, and finding your ways around that get a little bit messy. So, in conclusion, telecommunications driven tracing has worked in other countries, for example, South Korea. Um, the US has not used telecommunication data yet. They may in the future, but that is not known for sure. But they're right now using mobile advertising data. Um, Three, privacy versus reducing the spread. It's a hot topic and it's not easy to answer. Like I said previously, each side has benefits, um, but finding where you want to be and the risk you want to take um, is the question. And lastly, more and more projects will pop up, just like that Apple and Google project. There's a lot already being done, and we don't know whether or not those will be the answer to solving the spread, um, but it's a step in the right direction, and maybe another project will come along and build upon it. We'll just have to wait and see.